Joseph to interpret one of his dreams. He dreamed that 7 fat cows were eaten by 7 skinny cows, and 7 heads of healthy grain were eaten up by 7 heads of dried up grain. God helped Joseph interpret the dream. Egypt would experience 7 years of successful farming, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh was impressed and put Joseph second in charge of Egypt. During the famine, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt looking for food. When they got there, they met with Joseph, but didn't recognize him right away. When Joseph finally told them who he was, they wept because they were sorry for what they had done. Eventually, they went and got their father Jacob and brought him back to Egypt. Joseph took care of his entire family, giving them property in the best part of the land where they lived for the rest of their lives.
Welcome to chapter 3 of the story. Thank you for reading that. And we are looking forward today to checking it out a little greater detail. Last week, I gave everybody a puzzle piece. If you didn't get one, would you raise your hand? Cody Bryant wants to fix you up. And he's got a whole box full back there. While he's doing that, let me remind you of an announcement that I forgot. Next Sunday is Dollar Sunday. There will be a dollar box back by the door. And we want to ask each of you to bring $1 for each member of your family. And that's going to go to Meet a Need. And it's kind of something fun we've been doing for a month or two. And so we'll just put $1 in there. We'll let you know how that was shared at Meet a Need. And so that's next Sunday. All right, so if you have a puzzle piece, and you may have left yours at home, and if you did, that's okay, because you know what it looks like. You've been carrying it around in your pocket or something, you remember all about it. We are using this to remind us of something that we're calling the upper story and the lower story of God's Word. And as you look at your piece of the puzzle, it represents the lower story in particular. It represents the life story, okay, of you and I, or one of the biblical characters. It represents our daily lives, decisions we make, mistakes we make, victories we have, circumstances that happen to us. That's our lower story. That's life. That's what goes on in our everyday lives, and represents the everyday lives of people like Joseph and others. But you notice about the piece that it's a piece of a puzzle, and therefore it belongs in a larger context, right? It's designed to fit together with a bunch of other pieces to make a big picture. And that big picture represents God's upper story. That's how it all fits together, because God has a plan. And from the beginning to end, He is working history to accomplish His big picture, His upper story. And as we're going to see today, especially in Joseph's life, that lower story, represented by this little piece, is a part of a bigger story, an upper story of what God is doing in the world. So, that's kind of the idea of the puzzle piece. That's why I want you to carry around in your purse or your pocket or something like that to remind you of that. You notice, too, that your piece has some kind of color or texture or pattern on it, and probably, unless you're just really an amazing person, you probably don't really know where that fits in the puzzle. By the way, the puzzle was a picture of a mama elephant and a little one. But as you look at your puzzle piece, you probably can't really tell. Is that an eyeball, a tusk, a foot, a tail, a trunk? It's kind of hard to tell. And unless you plug that puzzle piece into the big picture, you really can't tell exactly what your role is. And so part of our goal with all of this as we study the story and preach the story is help each one of us kind of get a sense of where our puzzle piece fits in the upper story and the big picture. As you look at your puzzle piece, you probably will notice that there are some grooves in there. There's some places where there's kind of a deep gouge, a little bit like perhaps a wound. And actually, that deep groove helps your puzzle piece to attach, right, to other puzzle pieces and fit with them, and so that they all kind of fit together to do what they're supposed to do. You know, wounds are a part of our lower story, aren't they? Everybody has some wounds. And wounds are often, as a matter of fact, used by God. When we offer our wounds to God, they bring Him glory because He turns them into something of beauty and of value. For instance, in the story of Joseph, I think we see that taking place. Let me just fill in one little hole before we kind of go on. You watched the little video, that pretty well tells us the story of Joseph, and since you've already read it in chapter 3, that just refreshed it for you. But let me just say this, just in case you missed a little bit of that. Last week we talked about Abraham. Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had twins named Jacob and Esau. And God chose to use Jacob particularly to carry out his story. And so in the video we saw Jacob has 12 sons. And one of those sons is one named Joseph. Joseph, the favorite of his father. And even though Joseph was the favorite of his father, Joseph's life story, Joseph's lower story, also had quite a few wounds. Well, probably the obvious big one is the fact that he didn't get along well with his brothers. And when his father sent him to check on his brothers as they were taking care of sheep, some 65 miles from home, they saw him coming and they plotted to kill him. When he got there, they threw him in this well or this cistern, but before they got around to killing him, they decided, here comes some Midianites, they're traders, we're going to sell him to them as a slave, and so they did. What kind of wound would that leave in you? That your brothers detested you so much. And it says they hated him, and they couldn't speak a kind word to him. That they would plan to kill you and at the least sell you. Totally reject you. Betray you, I think you could say. And sort of devalue you. Yeah, we work in pieces. What kind of wound would that be? How frightening it must have been. I don't know what they did to him. Did they bind him, the Midianites, and make him walk along behind a camel? I'm not sure exactly what that looked like, but I'm sure it was scary. Where am I going? What's going to happen? Well, when he was sold to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh of Egypt, things went actually pretty well. And as Potiphar got to know him, he was impressed, and God was blessing Joseph. And it was all going good until Mrs. Potiphar took notice of Joseph and began to make advances, which, by the way, he had a pretty good strategy. He refused her, he resisted her, and finally he ran. It's a pretty good strategy for sin. And when he ran, she lied. Oh, the slave is coming here. He's making passes at me. He's trying to have an affair with me. And so here is this young man, 17 years old, and he's trying to do what's right. And what does he get for it? He gets punished, right? He gets treated unjustly. He's thrown into prison. I don't know about you, but when I'm treated unfairly, I just really don't like it. Nobody's ever thrown me in jail yet. I think that probably would leave a bit of a wound. It might even be something you might be a little mad at God. God, I said no. I did the right thing. I even told the lady, I can't do this against God. How come you're letting me go to prison I suppose there are probably others, just one other, maybe a little more minor compared to the first two, but when the king's officials, the cupbearer and the baker had dreams, and Joseph interpreted those dreams, he told one, the one he knew was going to survive and be put back in his position as the cupbearer. He said, remember me when you get back there and get me out of here. But as soon as the cupbearer got back in service, he forgot about Joseph. To be forgotten like that. Disappointment, unfair treatment, rejection, betrayal. Those are pretty strong words, aren't they? And it's amazing when we look at Joseph that he had gone through those things, that he was not bitter. And he was not making excuses. Well, I mean, especially here's a young man who has been told by his brothers, you're worthless. You're only worth 20 pieces of silver. We don't ever want to see you again. We don't want you. And so now here he is, lonely in a strange land, and this woman, I'm assuming that she's probably a pretty good looking lady, says, I like you. But he didn't make excuses. He didn't say, well, what difference does it make? Everybody else hates me anyway. What's it matter what I do? He kept his integrity. He said, this is the right thing to do, in spite of that fact. How can he be so responsible? How can he be so faithful to God? How can he be so well adjusted when he's been wounded so badly? Well, I think it's because that he understood that there was an upper story and that he was a part of it. Page 39 of the story is Genesis 45, verse 5. When his brothers first became aware of who he was, he knew they were, but when they first became aware, he said, I'm Joseph, your brother. Notice his sense of what God is doing. He said to them, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed, do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to the Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Do you see? He understands. God's doing something here. I mean, on one hand, sure, I could feel bad. He acknowledges, you guys sold me. But he understands God's role. He understands there is an upper story. He is a part of that upper story. Soon after that, he has them return home. They get Jacob, they bring him to Egypt, and everything's fine for a while. But Jacob, his father, is pretty aged, and so after a time, he passes away. And when he does, the brothers are pretty worried, because they are sure that all along Joseph has been harboring this grudge against them, and now Dad's gone. He's going to get him. And so they sort of manufactured this little story. Hey, Dad said before he died to take us. And so they come to him and they say, Dad said, don't do anything to us, and please forgive the boys, and all this kind of stuff. And Joseph, he says to them, this is page 42 of the story, Genesis 50. Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. And a little bit